So old growth trees, of course, are special because they've been around for so long, but they also provide a lot of important ecosystem services like habitat, flood mitigation, carbon storage. So I think it's heartbreaking to think about losing these trees as we move forward, and that the value of old growth in particular is something that needs more attention.
Welcome to Shoresides, where we explore the coastal North Carolina region's past, present, and future to promote community resilience. I'm Nicholas Magrino. From melting polar caps to powerful hurricanes, the effects of climate change can often be dramatic. North Carolina is experiencing a climate change-fueled phenomenon that is much more subtle but no less impactful. They are called ghost forests, forests of dead trees and marshland that are creeping up the coast of the state. They not only change the landscape, but they change how all living creatures, including humans, live with the land as well. We'll speak to two professors from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, to learn more about what ghost forests are, where they come from, and how their spread can be stopped.
Ghost forests are large expanses of standing dead trees. They can be of different types of trees, but here in Wilmington, our ghost forests are primarily bald cypress that occur in these forested wetlands that are freshwater naturally, but are experiencing higher levels of salinity that drive the ghost forest formation.
That was Monica Rother, who is a tree ring scientist and forest ecologist at UNCW. Her colleague, Andrea Hawks, is a professor of earth and ocean sciences. Hawks says that ghost forests are not only caused by rising sea levels seen across the globe, but also by a local catalyst.
So most likely in Wilmington, I mean, there's ghost forests all along the East Coast and in the Gulf of Mexico, along the Gulf of Mexico. Um, and the reason why we have ghost forests here is kind of twofold. So we have this background rate of relative sea level rise that's accelerating. But in addition to that, really locally, we've dredged the Cape Fear River over and over and over again to a deeper and further inland extent. And that's really amplified how much the tide reaches upriver. And so these previously freshwater systems are now starting to turn into slightly brackish and then kind of saltier and saltier systems.
Each professor uses their unique expertise to assess the ghost forest situation in different ways. For example, Rother uses her knowledge of tree rings to track the growth of trees that manage to stay alive while the saltwater is entering their systems.
We are using tree rings to examine the ghost forest problem. So, as a dendrochronologist, I use tree rings to look at the past and examine the environment that these trees experienced historically. And what we're seeing in the Cape Fear region is that, especially along Smith Creek, is that the trees are experiencing levels of suppressed growth where the tree rings are exceptionally narrow, and that overlaps with periods of dredging that increase salinity levels. So, again, the tree rings are records of the past, and when the tree rings are wide, that indicates that conditions are great for tree growth. The tree is very healthy. And when rings are narrow, that suggests that there's some kind of stressor in the environment. And what we're finding in our area is that dredging and associated increases in salinity led to these prolonged periods of tree stress.
Hawks is focusing on the history of organisms in the area to track the rising salinity and confirm the causes of ghost forests.
So I am a micropaleontologist, which sounds like a mouthful, and you could think tiny dinosaurs if you wanted to, right? Um, and so I work on this organism called Foraminifera. It's just a single-celled organism. It pretty much occupies all marine environments and brackish environments across the whole globe. And The ones we have, they're very useful in salt marshes because we've historically used them to actually reconstruct sea level going back thousands and thousands of years. And it's because they're pretty abundant and they preserve very well in the record over long periods of time. And so I can take a core in a marsh, I can sieve down to these really tiny organisms that are about the size of a root of your hair, and I can identify all those little groups of different species that live there, and I can actually tell you where you are relative to sea level within a few tens of centimeters. And so with the trees, we take a core right next to the tree, a sediment core, and then basically we analyze it kind of centimeter by centimeter. And we can actually tell as soon as these organisms show up that we have enough salinity in the system that they can live there, which can be pretty low amounts, so like a few parts per thousand. So like just starting to get slightly salty.
In other words, hawks can track the history of climate change in these areas by tracking this organism, which thrives in salty environments. When more of it turns up in an area, that means the salinity is increasing, and the forest is beginning to morph into a ghost forest.
And so you can actually use those chronologies along with the tree ring, which has like yearly chronology, right? And so we can actually try and think about what was the cause for this increase, right? The start of salinity to enter these systems, and kind of get at the timing, and then pair the tree suppression or the tree growth suppression with the appearance of the little bugs, and then we can be like, oh, likely had to do with salinity and not just more flooding, say.
By synthesizing their work, Rother and Hawks can create a clearer picture of where ghost forests come from and why they are spreading.
This is an exciting pairing of methods. I remember when Andrea came into my office and we both do this environmental proxy work, right? Where you take something in nature, in her case it's sediments or soil, and in my case it's trees, and you use that to look at patterns across time and space. And it was her idea initially for us to team together and try to see if we couldn't, find a shared signal for this ghost forest problem. And to our knowledge, it's kind of the first time that these types of methods have come together in a study, and we are definitely finding that they complement each other. They're very different records, but they complement each other well to give us a fuller and more confident understanding of what's going on.
Kind of more of a causation, and so one of the things is both independently. You might get tree growth that might get suppressed because of other reasons, right? Drought or something else. You might have the forams or these little bugs change, right, because of maybe something else in the environment. But when you pair them and then add on kind of what humans have done to the kind of river landscape, you can kind of get a more confident kind of picture of what's likely happened.
The most direct cause of ghost forest spread in North Carolina is the dredging of the Cape Fear River. Despite the damage caused to coastal ecosystems by introducing saltwater, the dredging of the river is not slowing down.
So this problem is just bound to be exacerbated, especially because we have approval to dredge the Cape Fear down to 47 feet, which is an additional 5 feet than it currently is. And that is basically kind of all the way through Wilmington, right? And so in the past, like back in the 1800s, they were just dredging like the mouth of the river, right? Kind of more toward downstream. And now it's just gone so far up the river and to such a depth that it's kind of, I don't, unless they stop dredging and let it like fill back in, I don't see it like reversing.
I'll add that we also see this as kind of a canary in the coal mine for what more gradual changes are happening all along the coast because of climate change and it's, leading to sea level rise. So we see in our area in Wilmington that dredging has made this happen relatively quickly, but over longer time scales, this problem will continue both in our region and across the Atlantic and Gulf coasts as sea levels continue to rise. So it's a human activity problem with dredging, and it's also a climate change problem, which both of these are difficult to solve. But locally, there are conversations about whether or not additional dredging is appropriate.
The changes that expanding ghost forests bring to North Carolina can range from nuisances to major disturbances, both for neighborhoods already occupying a ghost forest and places that could be next to turn.
So it could be that at some point, if they have an irrigation system, they might find that the salinity has perched the well. So you're going to end up spraying salty water on your lawn, which it probably won't like. That would be like kind of an extreme, that would be like fairly salty, right? And it perched the well on your land. Some of the other things that could happen is that as the forest degrades, right, you maybe have less intact kind of ecosystems. And so you're going to see this turnover of kind of what lives there and how it occupies the space, which also could change kind of the flora and fauna that have existed there previously. One of the other things is also, this is not only sea level, but there's also probably prolonged flooding at higher levels. And so you're physically seeing water maybe higher in your community than it ever had been previously.
That's an important one. So, intact, old growth, particularly forested wetlands, provide a lot of buffering against flooding. So, as these forested wetlands convert to marshes, we may see, as Andrea was describing, increased flooding in the adjacent communities.
This spread of ghost forests lowers resilience not only against hurricane-level flooding, but more benign flooding as well.
I would say one of the things, though, not to fool ourselves, is that it's not just like the hurricane, like the episodic event. We now have a crazy number of just regular flooding days that are, have just increased as time has gone on. And so it's kind of this like what they call sunny day flooding or nuisance flooding. And you've probably seen that like Water Street or like, in town, even in inland, some of the creeks get flooded.
While there are smaller solutions that can mitigate the spread of ghost forests, the fact of the matter is that as long as the Cape Fear River is getting dredged, forests will continue to transform into marshland.
So this is maybe a little outside of our expertise, but there are some kind of what we consider maybe Band-Aid approaches where you do something at a super local scale to try to build up the sediment and reduce the amount of saltwater intrusion. But based on the work that's been done, they're not very effective. They're very expensive, and they don't address how broad scale this problem is. So it doesn't seem from our perspective to be a true solution to the problem, to just kind of try to tackle it locally with some kind of Band-Aid approach.
As with many climate issues, the problem of ghost forests intersect with the issues of marginalization and inequality present throughout North Carolina.
We are not social scientists, but our master's student, Kendra Devereux, who worked on this project in the past couple of years, used a resource called Healthy Communities North Carolina to look at data within New Hanover County that's broken down at smaller spatial scales. And she found that the tracts of land adjacent to Smith Creek are more marginalized communities. So they have higher levels of poverty, they have higher levels of food hardship. So we also see this problem as an environmental justice issue. And I think that needs to be considered in terms of decision making surrounding dredging and climate change.
Whether you're living on the coast or further inland, Rother and Hawks emphasize that, should the spread of ghost forests continue unchecked, they will eventually come to impact everyone.
I think that one of the main things I want folks to understand is that, often people associate this as an edge effect. So like if I live at the coastline or on the river, I'll see this as a problem. But it's really all these tiny little creeks and tributaries, right, that come in all and crisscross Wilmington that are going to get more and more impacted. And so it's not necessarily a not in my backyard problem. It's actually a potentially in your backyard problem. It kind of behooves us to really think about it that way, right? It's not just this neighborhood or this neighborhood. We should really think about it as, okay, well, we're a community, right? Kind of more of a community approach.
From Shoresides, this is Nicholas Marino. Learn more about Shoresides at shoresides.org. Thanks for listening.